The Curious Case of the Page That Whispered, Book Eccentrics and the Perfect Tome, Episode 1. Rain drizzled onto Cecil Court in a gentle, unmusical pitter-patter that morning, though in the narrow lane everything sounded amplified. The light was a pallid grey, as though the clouds had borrowed all the colour from the day. Within the small antiquarian bookstore known as Blackwood and Braithwaite, 4 eccentric bibliophiles were going about their daily rituals, as they had for the past 20 years. Few places in London possessed so many oddities crammed into so modest a space. The books were stacked in precarious pillars, leaning like conspirators whispering secrets. They spilled across shelves, counters, and even up the old spiral staircase that led to a small mezzanine. The store smelled of aging paper, tobacco from years past, and linseed oil from battered old shelves. In that quiet hush, a hush that only a well-loved bookstore can emanate, one could hear the sound of pages being turned in the hush of 1,000 words, each whispering a fragment of a story. Indeed, the 4 people who presided here considered those hushes and whispers among life's highest pleasures. They were a curious quartet. First, there was Alice Braithwaite. A petite woman in her late 50s, she possessed an elfin grin. Her hair, once a bright auburn, now carried streaks of silvery grey that lent it the sheen of winter sunlight. Over her delicate shoulders, she always wore a velvet shawl patterned with gilded peacocks. Alice's passion was for the bindings of books. An exquisitely bound volume made her swoon in a way that no mere mortal companion ever could. Leather spines, gold tooling, hand-pressed covers, these were her language of devotion. She spoke often of a 17th-century Grolier binding as if it were a statue of Aphrodite. Indeed, her eyes sparkled like a child's at Christmas whenever a rare, perfectly bound volume came into her hands. Next, there was Barnabas Blackwood, a tall, stooped man with long, spidery arms. He was perhaps in his early 60s, though he seemed timeless. Barnabas had a peculiar obsession. He adored the sound a book made when opened and closed quickly. He would often select a heavy tome from the shelves, push it open and press it shut, pausing to close his eyes in reverence as the covers created that subtle whoosh of air. He called it the hush of literature. Others found this compulsion bizarre, but he paid no mind. He spoke softly, as if to preserve his hearing for the gentle percussion of closing books. Then there was Margaret Maggs Lowther, a robust woman who had the air of a kindly schoolmistress. She wore thick spectacles that had a habit of sliding down her nose. At the faintest reference to an old edition or a faint whiff of leather, those glasses would wiggle in excitement. Maggs had the extraordinary gift, or quirk, of smell. She believed books were best appreciated through their scent. She would lift a volume to her nose, inhaling deeply as if it were a rare perfume. Faint hint of vanilla, with undertones of old oak. Smells like a 19th-century print on wood pulp paper, she might mutter, unashamed. Sometimes people in the shop stared when she sniffed the spines of old tomes. She'd just smile, unembarrassed. Such was her devotion. Lastly, Richard Fellows, the youngest by a few years. He was in his early 50s and teased the others about their antiquity. He was slender and often smelled faintly of bergamot from the tea he sipped obsessively. Richard loved the content of books. "A good line from Boswell or Montaigne can carry me for a week," he would say. He was a walking library of quotations, from Dante's Inferno to Newton's Principia Mathematica to Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. Richard believed the words themselves, and the knowledge or wisdom they conveyed were of paramount importance. Unlike Alice, Barnabas, or Maggs, he cared little for the aesthetic or tactile experience, but worshipped the actual text. The 4 had met decades ago when each was a junior assistant in various bookstores around London. Over time, they pooled their resources and established Blackwood and Braithwaite, naming it after Barnabas and Alice in a moment of whimsical synergy. For 20 years, they toiled behind the creaking door of that shop, sharing the joys of their eccentricities. On that particular drizzly morning, life seemed to flow in its usual groove. The tiny brass bell on the door rang every so often, letting in a soggy customer. Mags was reorganizing the shelves of first edition detective novels, Wilkie Collins, Arthur Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie, her nose occasionally drifting near the spines. Alice was perched at the little desk by the window, carefully examining the gold tooling on a newly arrived 18th century prayer book. Barnabas paced the floor, tapping volumes shut to savor the crisp pop, and Richard sat behind the shop's antique till, sipping Earl Grey and reading Chaucer with rapt attention. Then a figure emerged in the doorway. The bell gave a wary jingle as the man entered. No one in the shop recognized him. He wore an old-fashioned black coat that fell near his ankles, soaked from the London rain. He was tall, gaunt, pale. His brow was furrowed, and his dark hair hung in limp strands. The man clutched something close to his chest, a heavy-looking tome wrapped in oilcloth. "Good morning," Alice said politely, though she could feel a tingle in the air. Something about him was uncanny. Barnabas stopped in mid-motion, the book in his hands poised halfway open and closed as though arrested by a sudden hush. Mags felt her nose twitch at the faint smell of must and old parchment drifting from the stranger's parcel. Richard closed his Chaucer, quietly observing. The stranger walked deeper into the shop and paused among the shelves. His eyes roved over the musty volumes as if cataloguing them with laser-like acuity. Finally, he reached the desk where Alice perched. "May I help you find something?" Alice ventured. The man gave a ghost of a smile. "Perhaps. But first, let me show you something." He reached inside his coat with trembling, long fingers, retrieving the oilcloth bundle. Gently, he began to unwrap it. Even Mags across the shop could smell the age wafting from it, an otherworldly sweet tang reminiscent of old monasteries and hidden libraries. One by one, the booksellers drifted closer. In the flicker of a single overhead bulb, they glimpsed the corners of a leather-bound volume. The leather was a deep chestnut color with elaborate filigree pressed in gold leaf. Even from 2 feet away, Alice could see the delicate, swirling pattern of flora and fauna running across the spine. She stifled an audible gasp. "It's remarkable," she murmured. Barnabas noticed the gilded edges and felt an inexplicable urge to open and close it just to hear its voice. For once, he resisted, waiting for the man to continue. Mag sniffed. She almost swooned. Richard, meanwhile, tried to read the text on the spine. It was in a language he did not recognize at first glance, perhaps a variant of archaic Latin or Greek. "We don't often see something like this," Richard said, leaning forward. "Might I ask its origin?" A ghost of that smile flitted again across the stranger's thin lips. "Its origin." His voice was soft, measured, from a place older than memory. "And from a library that no longer exists in the world you and I know?" Alice frowned, intrigued. "You speak in riddles." He turned to look at her. Truth is often hidden behind riddles. "Are you looking to sell?" Barnabas asked quietly. "Not exactly," the man replied. "I came here because I've heard that the four of you appreciate aspects of books that others might ignore. And I'm told you have a thirst for discoveries, each in your own peculiar way." Mags gave a small laugh, as if to break the tension. "I suppose that's true." The stranger placed the tome on the desk. "Perhaps you can help me? Do you know of the legend of the perfect book?" The question hung in the air like a swirling ghost. None of them had heard of such a legend. Booksellers hear many rumors: lost manuscripts of Shakespeare, secret diaries of Leonardo da Vinci, fabled hidden libraries in catacombs. But the phrase perfect book was new to them. Perfect binding, perfect smell, perfect sound, perfect content. Each of you, Alice Braithwaite, Barnabas Blackwood, Margaret Lowther, Richard Fellows, cherishes one of these qualities above all else. He let his words settle. So the rumor goes that there exists a single volume that meets all four standards beyond imagination. And that, my dear bibliophiles, is the perfect book. Richard cleared his throat. "But that's an impossibility. Perfection is subjective." "Indeed," the stranger agreed, though his eyes gleamed with an uncanny light. "And yet, It's said that once you've held this book, you never again see the world in quite the same way. Alice felt a frisson of excitement, though a hint of skepticism prickled her. That's quite the story, almost like a fairy tale. Mag smirked. Books smell lovely enough as it is, but a perfect smell. I'd be hard-pressed to describe that. Barnabas was silent, turning the idea over like a coin in his mind. If such a book existed, he said softly, one would never forget the perfect hush of its pages. It might be overwhelming. Perfect in every aspect, like hearing the purest chord. Richard looked at the stranger curiously. Why bring this story to us now? The stranger lightly tapped the tome he'd brought, then slid it across the desk. I came to show you this because I think you'll find it interesting. It's not the perfect book, merely a sample of the craft that was said to lead to that ephemeral creation. He opened it carefully. The spine glided open with no noise at all, a frictionless hush that made Barnabas's eyes go wide. The binding was impeccable, with ornate gold stitching. Alice's heart fluttered. The smell that wafted out was heady, making Mag swoon. Richard peered at the lines of an archaic script. Even at a glance, the text shimmered with labyrinthine references and allusions as though it held an entire cosmos within. It was only a fleeting moment, but each of them felt the pull. "Who are you?" Alice breathed, eyes fixed on the pages. He smiled, but instead of answering, he gestured to the archaic text. It's said that the path to the perfect book is hidden in cryptic references such as these. But the real secret is simpler than you might imagine. Richard shook his head in disbelief. If this is real, how come we've never heard of it before? That's the trouble, isn't it? The stranger closed the book gently, producing a soft exhalation of air. Barnabas nearly shuddered at the beauty of that sound. We do not see what we do not seek. As the old proverb says, seek and ye shall find. But if you believe something cannot exist, you never bother to look for it. A faint hush followed. Alice realized that the doorbell had rung but once upon the stranger's arrival, and not a single customer had come in since. It was as if time had slowed. Mags finally found her voice. Well, it's an intriguing notion, this perfect book. I suppose if anyone could track it down, it would be the four of us. But it's a fool's errand, yes? The stranger took his hands off the volume and fixed them with a steady gaze. Is it foolish to search for perfection? Barnabas gave a half-smile. We have daily tasks, a shop to run. We can't simply drop everything for a legend. The stranger stood up straighter, as though something in him was satisfied. Then consider this my gift. He tapped the closed tome. A clue that might whet your appetites. Perhaps the quest isn't so foolish, because as the rumor goes, such a book does indeed exist, but precisely where and when you least expect it. The problem is that nobody searches. He lifted the volume, wrapped it again in the oilcloth, and tucked it under his arm. For a moment it seemed he might vanish into the gloom. Farewell, he murmured. And remember what I said. The perfect book might be out there waiting. Alice leapt forward a half-step. Wait! Where can we find you again? You haven't told us your name. The stranger paused at the door, the faintest light of the rainy street outlining his tall figure. Names are like pages. You can read them, but that doesn't mean you know the story. And with that cryptic remark, he disappeared into the drizzle, the doorbell giving one doleful clang behind him. For a stretch of seconds, the four stood in silence, each consumed by the echo of what had just transpired. The hush of the shop felt charged. Outside, passers-by hurried along oblivious. Finally, Richard spoke, almost in a whisper. Well, that was something. Alice nodded, still gazing at the door. Did any of you catch that binding? Exquisite beyond measure. I've never seen anything like it. Barnabas let out a trembling sigh. The way the spine opened like a whispered confession. I can't imagine a more perfect sound. Mags, arms folded, shivered with excitement. The smell, it was like stepping into a hidden library, ancient and pure. And the text, Richard said quietly, tapping a finger against his chin. It was so dense with references. I glimpsed labyrinthine lines, like some secret code. I recognized some Greek letters, perhaps scraps of medieval philosophical commentary, possibly 14th century or earlier. They all lapsed into thought again. It's a tall tale, Barnabas said, trying to reassert logic. A perfect book, truly. Mags murmured, "We've heard of plenty of mythical volumes. The Book of Thoth, the lost city of the library at Alexandria, all that." Richard cracked a half smile. True, and maybe it's just a cryptic puzzle or a promotional trick for some modern facsimile. But something about that man felt unusual. Alice drummed her fingers on the desk. He gave us that parting phrase. Such a book does indeed exist, but precisely where and when you very least expect it. The problem is that nobody searches. A hush of decision settled upon them. Without saying anything, they all knew they'd just been presented with the seed of an adventure. None of them had taken a holiday or left the shop unwatched for more than a few hours in years. Yet this was too tantalizing a mystery to leave alone. "If the man returns, perhaps we can glean more," said Mags. But he didn't return that day, nor the next. By the end of the week, the four were restless. They found themselves drifting to corners of the shop they rarely visited, rummaging through obscure volumes they seldom opened, as if the clue might hide in their own domain. Alice took to carefully re-examining every rare binding in the shop, searching for marks that might match the cryptic flourishes on the stranger's volume. Barnabas tested the spines of old books, listening for a particular hush. Mags sniffed her way through rows of antique tomes as though the key might be discovered by scent alone. Richard read incessantly, scouring their hidden stock of medieval manuscripts for parallels. Then, after nearly a fortnight, they gathered around the battered oak table in the back office. It was late evening, the shop closed. A single lamp cast a pool of gold. The atmosphere carried the hush of secrets. "I haven't found anything," Barnabas began. "Not so much as a mention of a perfect book." Mag sighed, removing her spectacles to rub her eyes. "Nor I. I found references to perfect libraries in some treatises from centuries ago, mostly apocryphal, but nothing that resonates with the man's clue." Alice let out a soft laugh. "I've gone through a good portion of our special collection. If I'd seen any binding reminiscent of what that stranger had, I'd have recognized it. But it's a dead end." Richard set his teacup down. "So, we're left with a legend we never heard before, a cryptic visitor, and a single riddle." Alice stared at the lamp's flicker. How can something so intangible feel so pressing? A silence. Then Barnabas said, "But do we want to take this further? We should decide. If it's a fool's errand, maybe we should let it lie." Richard's eyes darted around. "Oh, come now, Barnabas. You can't tell me you're not curious. You've spent half your day tapping the spines of volumes, listening for some echo of that hush. Alice is daydreaming about new gold tooling methods she's never seen. Mags has been sniffing more than ever, like a hound on a scent, and I've read until my eyes nearly crossed." Mags gave a short laugh. "He's right. We're already searching, whether we admit it or not." Alice sighed. "I suppose so. Then perhaps we are the fools who will try." Barnabas rubbed his bony jaw. "Well, if the perfect book truly exists, I'd like to see it, if only to hear its sound. But how do we begin searching for a chimera?" No one had an immediate answer. They sat in the hush of that old shop, the spines of thousands of books silently gazing upon them. Outside, in Cecil Court, the street was emptier than a closed storybook. Only the reflection of a distant street lamp cast occasional flickers of light on the glass. Richard cleared his throat. "Remember what he said. Such a book does indeed exist, but precisely where and when you least expect it. The problem is that nobody searches. Maybe we should do something unexpected." They turned to him, He continued, "We can search beyond London. Maybe other bibliophiles, acquaintances, or obscure libraries might have heard the rumor. Let's not confine ourselves to the same circles. Let's wander out of the normal bounds. Talk to old friends, old collectors. We'll mention the stranger or the notion of a perfect volume. See if anything sparks." Alice nodded. "Yes, we do know folks all across the country. Some in Oxford, some in Cambridge, a handful scattered across Europe. We can start sending letters, or we could even go in person." Mags let out a breath. "And who knows? Maybe the stranger will reappear." Barnabas, his curiosity aroused, stood up. "Then it's settled. For the first time in 2 decades, we're going to do something thoroughly unorthodox. We'll leave the shop in the hands of a temporary caretaker, someone we trust, and we'll go searching for the ephemeral, if only for a short while." The four nodded in agreement. An electric thrill rippled through them, a heady mixture of foreboding and excitement. None could recall the last time they'd embarked on an actual quest. This was more than a trifling rumor. They each felt it in their bones. Some intangible magnet was pulling them onward. And so the stage was set for the strangest adventure of their lives. If someone had told them that very evening the truths and horrors they would uncover, they might have locked the shop doors, brewed a pot of tea, and resolved to remain forever with their beloved books in the comfortable hush of Blackwood and Braithwaite. But the seeds of longing for the perfect book had been sown, and those seeds were destined to grow in unexpected ways. Episode 2. It was a dim, tempestuous dawn when Alice arrived early to the shop. The clouds overhead swirled in gunmetal grey, and the wind rattled the sign that hung outside. She had come with her old trunk, prepared for a journey. She wasn't sure how long she'd be gone. Days, maybe weeks. Though it felt absurd to uproot life for a legend, her heart was strangely calm. Barnabas came next, wearing a moth-eaten coat of dark tweed. He looked anxious yet determined. Mags followed, a thick scarf wrapped around her neck, exhaling plumes of steam in the chilly air. Last of all was Richard, who carried a worn satchel filled with notebooks, quills, reference works, and a healthy stash of Earl Grey tea bags. He refused to travel anywhere without them. They stood in the cramped interior of the shop, their eyes roaming over the shelves. This place had been their haven for so long, they'd rarely left it in the hands of strangers. But a caretaker was arranged, a quiet, meticulous young scholar named Trevor, who had been frequenting the shop for years. Trevor possessed a deep reverence for the volumes and promised to guard them with his life. His eyes shone with excitement at the chance to be entrusted with the store, though he admitted he was baffled by the owner's sudden departure. "You're sure you'll manage?" Mags asked, for the 5th time that hour. Trevor smiled benignly, brushing a bit of sandy hair from his forehead. "I'll manage fine, Miss Lowther. This place is paradise for me. I'll dust the spines daily and keep the accounts meticulously." Barnabas patted the young man's shoulder. "You're a good lad. Now, if any peculiar strangers come about asking for us, especially one with a strange book, try to get a name or at least some contact details." Trevor nodded, though confusion clouded his features. "Yes, of course. But do you think that will happen?" Alice suppressed a smile. "We don't know what we think anymore. We're chasing a myth, Trevor." "Understood, Miss Braithwaite." With that, the quartet gathered their coats and hats. Rain threatened, so they opened a black umbrella and stepped out onto Cecil Court. The lane's magical hush lingered behind them, but beyond, the city roared with morning bustle. Taxis splashed through puddles, and the scent of wet pavement and coffee drifted on the wind. The four parted ways at the corner, with a plan to reconvene in 2 days at a bed and breakfast near Oxford. From there, they would decide their next move. "Good luck, you three," Mag said, adjusting her scarf. "I'm heading to see an old friend in Covent Garden who collects ancient manuscripts. Might as well start close to home." Barnabas told them he'd visit the British Library to see if any cryptic references lurked in obscure catalogues. Richard would pay a call to a retired professor he knew who specialized in medieval illusions of celestial volumes. And Alice, for her part, planned to speak with the head of a renowned bookbinding guild in Bloomsbury. If that mysterious gold tooling was indeed unique, someone might recognize it. So began the first steps of their odd odyssey. 2 days later, the wind was howling across the rolling fields near Oxford, bringing in a chill that made them pull their coats tighter. They reconvened at the bed and breakfast, a snug place called the Meridew House, run by an elderly couple who fed them tea and scones. The common room was awash in floral prints, crocheted doilies and antiques. A single fireplace crackled, lending warmth and the faint smell of burnt pine. Barnabas arrived first, a battered old trunk in tow, and soon Alice joined him in the cosy lounge. She looked tired but excited. "Any leads?" Barnabas asked, handing her a cup of tea. "I spoke to the guild," she said, sitting on the worn floral armchair. "They knew nothing explicitly about a perfect book, but they did mention a rumor of a golden binder, an anonymous craftsman rumored to have bound volumes so flawless that they seemed otherworldly. No one's certain if this is a real person or a legendary persona. But some of the designs the guild described reminded me of the swirling gold filigree on that stranger's volume." Barnabas furrowed his brow. "Interesting. And you think that's connected?" "I can't say, but it's a clue," Alice said. She sipped the tea, wincing a bit at its strong flavor. "What about you?" Barnabas rubbed his eyes wearily. "The British Library is a labyrinth. I waded through old catalogues, manuscripts, references to secret texts. The only snippet I found was a single footnote referencing the Book of Enos in a 15th century monastic text that was described as without flaw in sound or form. But the footnote was incomplete, and the original manuscript is missing from their collection, possibly destroyed during the Reformation. So I'm at a dead end. But maybe that golden binder and this Book of Enos are threads of the same tapestry." Before they could say more, Mags and Richard arrived together, both looking soaked from the wind and drizzle outside. They huddled next to the fireplace, eager for warmth. Richard, removing his dripping coat, said, "Strange day. I visited Professor Mortimer in Bloomsbury. He's well versed in bizarre medieval lore. He claims to have heard of the legend of a perfect text. He called it Codex Omnium, or the Codex of all things. Said it was rumored to have come from an ancient desert library in the Middle East. But that's all he knew, just scraps of rumor. No location, no definitive reference. He actually chuckled at me, saying it's a wild goose chase." Mags nodded. "I had a similar outcome. My contact was clueless about a perfect book, but I did discover a fragile 16th century volume in his collection that apparently references the great tome that is all. He let me sniff the pages. They smell of ancient libraries and parchment made from goatskin. Very potent. But again, it's a passing mention. No direct lead." The four huddled closer as the flames danced shadows on the walls. The wind whistled outside, and the inn's cat wound itself around their ankles, purring. Alice's gaze flicked from one to the next. "So, we all found morsels. Golden binder, Book of Enos, Codex Omnium, great tome that is all. They may be separate legends, or maybe they're all describing the same elusive thing." Mags took off her spectacles and rubbed the lens with a corner of her sleeve. "If they are the same, it's an old legend indeed, mentioned in medieval sources, rumored by a secret guild. Where do we go from here?" A hush fell as the wind moaned. Richard opened his satchel and took out a small journal. "We need to cross-reference these. See if we can find a place that threads them all together." The professor said some references might be found in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. That's not far from here. Perhaps we can start in the archives. Oxford has the largest collection of old manuscripts outside of the British Library. If any place might link these clues, it's there." They agreed. Tomorrow they would go to the Bodleian. But as they sat in companionable silence, an uneasy feeling niggled at them. Barnabas stared at the flickering flames. "Do you think that stranger is expecting us to chase after this?" He mentioned we do not see what we do not seek. It's almost like he wanted to spur us on. Alice nodded. Probably. He knew we'd bite the hook. But to what end? Why would he want this? Richard sighed. Who can say? Maybe he's testing us, or maybe it's some grand game. But for me, the curiosity is unstoppable. Mags pressed her fingertips together. Me too. Besides, we're too far in to back out now. Something about all this. It feels bigger than a mere hoax. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the windows, as if nature itself were eavesdropping. Then the old grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9 times. They took it as a cue to retire, each to their own modest room in the Merridew house. But none slept easily, haunted by half-formed dreams, labyrinthine libraries, gold-bound volumes shimmering, the hush of pages turning in darkness, or a faint smell of centuries drifting from a hidden corridor. The next day dawned cold and bleak. They made their way to the Bodleian Library. Oxford's winding streets were alive with students, professors, and visitors. Old stone buildings loomed overhead, centuries of scholarship pressed into their foundations. The Bodleians' reading rooms exuded a hush reminiscent of cathedrals. Indeed, it was a kind of cathedral, but for books. They divided tasks. Barnabas and Mags went to consult the oldest manuscripts, searching for references to the Book of Enos or anything describing a perfect codex. Alice and Richard took on the labyrinth of subject catalogues, hoping to unearth references to mythical binders or rumoured volumes from hidden libraries. Hour upon hour they delved into the dusty tomes. The staff, used to unusual requests, helped as best they could, but more often than not, the staff simply shrugged. These were legends scattered in the margins of history. At midday they reconvened in the courtyard, sharing meagre findings. Barnabas sighed, looking haggard. We found a mention of something called Liber Definitivus in a cryptic 14th century translation from Arabic texts. It apparently encompassed all knowledge of the earthly realm in perfect clarity and presentation. But the mention ends abruptly. Mags nodded. And we saw a 17th century commentary on monastic libraries in North Africa that whispered rumours of a single volume crafted by an unknown scribe who heard the voice of angels binding knowledge into pages. But no explicit location. Alice frowned. Richard and I discovered repeated references to something known as the fourfold perfection in a certain esoteric treatise. The treatise claims that if one can unify the 4 aspects of a text, binding, sound, scent, and content, into a single volume, one might approach the realm of the divine. It seems eerily aligned with what the stranger told us. Richard chewed his lip. Yes, it even said that men have gone mad seeking such perfection, because to create a flawless vessel for perfect words is akin to playing God. Some scribes believed only divine intervention could yield such an artifact. They stood there in the cold courtyard, feelings of awe and trepidation swirling. After a brief lunch of sandwiches at a nearby cafe, they returned to the reading rooms. In the late afternoon, a breakthrough arrived. Barnabas, flipping through a battered old volume of cryptic references, stumbled upon a single paragraph. And of the book Perfecta, the legend runneth that it was once spied in a hidden library below the sands, wherein all arts of binding converged, all sense of knowledge arose, all hush of pages were as the breath of 1,000 angels, and all text illuminated the mind with unspeakable truths. Yet be warned, for the book is as a ghost, appearing where it is least expected, and vanished in the same manner. Barnabas read it aloud to Mags. They exchanged looks of both excitement and dread. The quote came from a 16th century text by one Father Elfridus of Canterbury, a somewhat obscure figure who travelled extensively in the Holy Land. The mention was fleeting, but it was more direct than any reference they'd found thus far. Below the sands, it said, a cryptic phrase that suggested somewhere desert-like, perhaps in the Middle East or North Africa. Could that be the missing link to the references from the professor about a desert library? When they rejoined the others, Barnabas's discovery caused a ripple of astonishment. A hidden library below the sands. That can't be a coincidence, Richard said. I recall something from the professor. A rumor of an ancient underground library rumored to be near the old Silk Road routes, or possibly in Egypt or Arabia. Mags glanced at a large world map pinned to the library's corridor. So are we to chase it all the way to a desert? That's no small journey. Alice's heart pounded. If we take this step, we're venturing quite far from home. Barnabas folded the notes and placed them in his coat pocket. If that's indeed where the clue leads, do we have any reason to doubt it? Our leads seem to converge on an ancient desert library. That might be the birthplace or resting place of the rumored perfect book. A hush descended. It was a huge undertaking. International travel was no small matter. They'd have to find a caretaker for the shop longer term. They'd have to gather resources, plan. But was that not the nature of a genuine quest? Richard looked around at his longtime friends. We've spent our whole lives cherishing books within the safe confines of Cecil Court. Are we truly prepared to cross seas and sands for a legend? Alice studied the faces of her companions and realized they all wore the same expression, a mix of apprehension and an undeniable sparkle of longing. They were each intimately drawn to one aspect of a book's perfection, and the chance, even the faintest possibility, of witnessing such a marvel set their hearts racing. She spoke softly. I can't imagine living the rest of my life not knowing if the rumor was true. Can you? Mag shook her head. Number I'd always wonder. Every sniff of an old tome would remind me of what I might have missed. Barnabas looked away, but there was a hint of determination in his eyes. Then we go. If we fail, we fail. But at least we tried. Richard nodded. Agreed. Let's do it. Thus, the four decided that the next step of their journey would carry them beyond the familiar shores of England in search of an underground library rumored in half-forgotten texts. They had only fragments, references to Below the Sands, ephemeral mention of the Book Perfecta, legends of a golden binder, the fourfold perfection. They would follow these threads. Excitement crackled between them as they left the Bodleian Library. The shadows of Oxford's spires fell long in the late afternoon, and clouds parted to reveal a fleeting ray of sun. A sense of foreboding lingered, for the unknown deserts were far away, and the quest might lead to heartbreak or discovery or madness. Yet hope burned bright in their hearts, as only bibliophiles can hope when they stand on the threshold of an impossible book. Episode 3. A week later, they found themselves in Cairo. The city's frenetic energy collided with their dusty English sensibilities in a heady swirl. The air was warm and thick with the aromas of spices, cumin, cardamom, the tang of roasted meats, and drifting plumes of sweet hookah smoke from bustling cafes. Busy streets, packed with honking cars and donkey carts alike, tested their nerves. But they quickly adapted, enthralled by the sheer vitality of it all. The impetus for coming specifically to Cairo was a lead from Richard's academic contact, an elderly Egyptian scholar named Dr. Samir Galal. Dr. Galal's research touched on medieval Arabic texts that whispered of hidden repositories of knowledge in the vast deserts, possibly near the Libyan border or deep within the Sinai. Over a polite exchange of emails and telephone calls that crackled with uncertain reception, Dr. Galal had invited them to visit so they could share their references and see if they matched any local law. They stayed in a small guest house near downtown Cairo. The night they arrived, the city glowed under neon lights, and the sound of distant traffic lulled them to an uneasy sleep. Early the following morning, they awoke to the call of the muezzin echoing across rooftops, and the four travelers set out in a taxi to the old district where Dr. Galal lived. His home was an ancient three-story structure with intricate latticework windows nestled amid narrow alleys. A jasmine vine twined around an iron gate, perfuming the courtyard. They knocked, and a servant in a traditional galabeah ushered them to a sitting room. There, Dr. Galal greeted them. He was a refined older gentleman with thick glasses and a kindly face. His English had a melodic lilt, and he welcomed them warmly, offering mint tea and sweet pastries. The room itself was lined with towering bookshelves in Arabic and other languages, hinting at a lifetime of scholarship. "So, my English friends," he said, peering at them through his glasses, "I understand you are after a certain legendary volume, the so-called perfect book?" He smiled, not unkindly, but with a hint of amused skepticism. They exchanged glances before Richard spoke. "Indeed. We've uncovered references in medieval manuscripts to a hidden library in the desert that may contain or have contained such a volume. We hoped you might guide us, or at least confirm if such legends are known here." Dr. Galal nodded slowly. "Yes, the desert is full of mysteries. I have heard of more than one rumored library. Tales from Bedouins and older texts speak of catacombs of books lying beneath dunes. Some say it was the library of a lost city. Others insist it's a trove of heretical texts hidden by fleeing scholars centuries ago. Sometimes the rumor is that it was built by jinn. I cannot confirm the truth, but the legends persist." Alice leaned forward, her heart pounding. "Have you come across references to an extraordinary binder or a scribe who created a perfect volume?" The scholar's brow furrowed. "Not precisely in those words. However, in certain medieval Arabic treatises, there is mention of a book that sees itself, a cryptic phrase, a text that supposedly reflects reality so precisely that it might as well be reality. Some have interpreted it as a metaphor for divine scripture, but others suggest it was an actual manuscript." He paused to sip his mint tea. "And there is also an old rumor among the Bedouins about a place they call al-Kutub, literally mother of books. According to them, the library lies under shifting sands and has never been fully found, only glimpsed. Some travelers claim they stumbled upon an entrance that vanished when they tried to return." "Below the sands," Barnabas murmured, recalling the phrase from Father Elfredus's mention. His skin tingled. Dr. Galal smiled sadly. "Yes, many Western explorers have searched in vain. The desert is vast and cruel. If you do decide to pursue it, you must do so with great caution. You could become lost." "But do you have any clues, maps, coordinates, anything that might help us locate it?" Mags asked, her voice earnest. The scholar rose from his chair, moving to a large wooden chest in the corner. He unlocked it with a small key and rummaged until he withdrew a rolled parchment. "This is something passed down from my grandfather, also a scholar. It is said to be an old copy of a map, though no one has confirmed its accuracy. It shows an area west of the Fayum region, deep in the desert. There is a marking that some say points to an underground ruin. Could be a tomb, a fortress, or maybe this rumored library." He spread the parchment on a low table. The lines were faded, and the script was a mix of Arabic and an older form of writing. A small symbol, possibly representing an underground chamber, was circled. The four hovered over it, hearts alight with excitement. "This might be it," said Richard, "or at least it might be a lead." Dr. Galal nodded. "I will lend it to you, if you wish, but please, be careful. I cannot guarantee your success or safety. The desert has many illusions." Alice's eyes shone. "Thank you, Doctor. Galal, we will treat it with utmost care." He patted the map. "Remember, legends are shaped by those who believe or disbelieve. Sometimes what we find is not what we expect." They took their leave soon after, brimming with gratitude. Dr. Galal refused any payment, saying that knowledge should be shared freely among seekers of truth. The four parted with heartfelt thanks, tucking the precious map into a protective tube. Outside, the sun blazed overhead. The call to prayer echoed across minarets. The air felt heavy with possibility. The next step involved logistics. They needed a guide who knew the western deserts. They asked around the local travel agencies and eventually found a reliable guide named Omar, a middle-aged man with a weather-beaten face and the calm confidence of one who had traversed dunes for years. Omar agreed to take them to the region west of Fayum, though he warned them it was not a standard tourist route. They would need four-wheel drive vehicles, supplies, and good fortune. "You are searching for old ruins?" Omar inquired politely as they packed. "You do not appear to be treasure hunters." Barnabas smiled wryly. "We're after something more elusive than treasure. A library under the sands, if you can believe it." Omar raised an eyebrow, but did not mock them. "I have heard many stories out there. Some see strange shapes, illusions. The desert plays tricks on the mind. We will see what we find, inshallah." And so they set off the following dawn. Their convoy of 2 four-wheel drives left the outskirts of Cairo, crossing roads that soon gave way to rocky terrain, then open desert. The city's roar faded behind them. The sand stretched in all directions, shimmering under the relentless sun. The color of the dunes shifted from pale gold to a deep orange near sunset. The dryness of the air sapped their throats. Mags, especially, was overwhelmed by the harshness. She'd grown used to the damp chill of London, not this arid, scorching world. For days they journeyed deeper. They camped under star-filled skies. Nighttime brought a biting cold, surprising in contrast to the daytime heat. They huddled around a small fire, sipping tea that Omar brewed. Alice often stared at the dancing flames, thinking about the shop back home. Mags gazed at the starry sweep of the Milky Way, inhaling the desert's distinct dryness. It was a far cry from the musty perfume of old paper. Barnabas sat quietly, sometimes opening and closing small notebooks just to hear the crisp sound in the silent desert air. Richard scribbled entries in his journal, quoting everything from T.E. Lawrence to ancient Egyptian proverbs. Each morning, they consulted Dr. Galal's map. They used a GPS to approximate where the circled ruin might lie. The dunes shifted daily, making navigation treacherous. Omar frowned over the map, but continued forging ahead. They encountered rocky outcrops that matched some references, then turned deeper into lonely sands. The sense of foreboding grew. On the 5th day, they reached a remote plateau. The scorching sun hammered down, and the dryness made their lips crack. As they scanned the horizon, something glinted in the distance, a shape half buried in the dunes. Omar drove cautiously toward it. When they drew near, they saw partially exposed ruins of a stone structure, a wall, columns broken at the base, scattered debris. It didn't resemble typical ancient Egyptian architecture. The style seemed different, possibly older or from a lesser-known civilization. A hush fell upon them as they stepped out into the scorching sand. They wandered among the remnants. Alice touched a carved stone that bore strange symbols. Barnabas ran a hand along a column, listening to the desert wind moaning through a crack. Mags knelt, sniffing the hot air near a partially buried entrance. She laughed at herself, imagined sniffing for an ancient library. Yet she couldn't help but try. Richard carefully studied the inscriptions, but they were too eroded to decipher. At length, Omar led them around a corner of crumbled walls. There, half choked by shifting sand, was an opening in the ground, an archway leading into darkness. Barnabas's heart thumped. Could this be the entrance to the rumored catacombs? They tested the ground, clearing away sand. The archway descended into a stairwell, each step thick with debris. The air that wafted up was stale and cool. Omar's face remained solemn. "We must be cautious. The structure may be unstable." Yet the four couldn't suppress their excitement. They readied flashlights, water, and a rope. One by one, they squeezed through the archway and carefully descended into the gloom. Their beams illuminated a corridor lined with stone, the walls carved with faint, swirling shapes. The temperature dropped noticeably, a relief from the raging sun above. They crept deeper, hearts pounding. The corridor opened into a larger chamber. Dust motes flickered in the flashlight beams. Alice's breath caught in her throat. Along the walls were shelves hewn from the rock, some containing decayed fragments of parchment or wooden tablets. "Look," Mags whispered, shining her light on a ragged pile of something that might once have been books. The dryness of the desert had mummified them, leaving them brittle. Barnabas gingerly touched one, only for the cover to crumble. They fanned out, exploring. The architecture suggested it was once a storeroom or library. The air smelled of ancient dust and centuries of stillness. The hair on the back of Barnabas's neck stood up. He felt the quiet hush of an eons-lost repository. But as they advanced to another passage, they found only collapsed walls and rubble. It seemed the deeper sections might have caved in. Alice tried shining her flashlight into a narrow gap, but it led to a dark mass of fallen stone. "It could go on," she said, "but it's blocked." Richard scoured the corners. "If this is the rumoured library, it's partially destroyed." Mags felt a jolt of sadness. Centuries of secrets, lost to time. Barnabas tested the debris. Some of it shifted precariously. Attempting to excavate by hand might cause further collapse. Omar, who stood by with mounting concern, said, "Friends, we must be careful. The risk of cave-in is high. Maybe we should be content with what we've found." They spent another hour carefully searching for any salvageable text, but what remained was too decayed to read. It was heartbreakingly close to a revelation, yet they found no sign of the perfect book. Instead, they discovered only the tragic remains of what might have once been a great trove of knowledge. At last, with sinking hearts, they retreated back up the stairs into the blinding desert sun. They regrouped near the vehicles, gloom settling over them. "Is this it?" Mags asked quietly. "We came all this way, and everything is destroyed." Richard swallowed hard. "Could be. Or maybe it's not the right place. Or perhaps the rumours of an underground library are only partially true, scattered across different locations." Alice kicked at the sand, frustration welling up. "I almost felt it in there. Something like a hush of ages. But it's all gone." Barnabas looked at the horizon. A swirl of wind kicked sand into a small dust devil. "It can't end here. Maybe we should keep searching. The map might not be precise." Omar listened quietly, then said, "We can search nearby areas. The desert is large, but you must decide if it's worth the risk. Another day or two of searching, and we'll run low on supplies." They glanced at one another. A silent consensus arose. They'd press on a bit farther, test the surrounding region. They'd come too far to give up without thorough exploration. And so, for another day, they drove around the vicinity, scanning for signs of more ruins or openings in the desert floor. They found naught but vast dunes, rocky escarpments, and the sun beating down mercilessly. Hope dwindled. Their water supply needed rationing, and morale sagged. On the evening of the seventh day, they camped near a low ridge. The sky turned blood-red at sunset, a dramatic wash of color. Mags was finishing a simple meal of tinned vegetables and dried bread. Alice stared at the dying embers of the fire. Barnabas thumbed the battered corner of a guidebook. Richard wrote in his journal, but his words felt flat. It seemed they had reached a dead end, both literally and figuratively. Silence draped them. Even the wind had died, leaving an eerie stillness. As the stars emerged, they wondered about the stranger who had set them on this path. Did he know it would end in heartbreak? Or was there more they had yet to discover? Eventually, they retired to their tents. Alice lay awake, hearing her heartbeat echo in the hush of the desert. She tried to imagine the perfect binding, the perfect scent, the perfect hush, the perfect content. If such a miracle existed, was it truly meant to be found? Or was it a myth meant to lure them into chasing illusions? Outside, unseen by any of them, a single meteor streaked across the sky, lost amid the vastness of the cosmos. Episode 4. They returned to Cairo the next day, disappointed yet unwilling to declare defeat. Even so, the aura of their quest felt heavier. They decided to rest for a while, gather fresh insight, and see if any local records might guide them to a different site. That evening, after checking back into the guest house, they drifted into a cramped local cafe. The atmosphere was lively, Egyptian pop music on the radio, patrons laughing and chatting, the smell of cardamom coffee thick in the air. The four travellers found a corner table, their dusty clothes marking them as outsiders among the city crowd. They ordered small cups of strong, sweet coffee, hoping to soothe their weary spirits. As they sat there, a man at a nearby table caught Barnabas's eye. He was older, wearing a white turban and a tailored vest. He gave a polite nod. Barnabas, out of reflex, nodded back. Then the man did something odd. He raised a small leather-bound book, as if showing it to Barnabas. Barnabas blinked, uncertain if it was a signal or coincidence. The man stood, drifting over to their table. In accented but clear English, he said, "You are foreigners, yes? You look like you have travelled far. May I sit?" They exchanged curious looks. Richard gestured for him to take a seat. Of course. The man introduced himself as Mustafa. "I could not help but notice you. You have the look of seekers." Mags laughed gently. "We are indeed seeking something, though how you can tell is a mystery." Mustafa shrugged. "I deal in old books. I sense the signs of curiosity in your eyes, and the dust of travel on your clothes. Perhaps you've been looking for something in the desert." Alice leaned forward, her interest piqued. "You're a bookseller." He inclined his head. "In a small way. I help collectors and explorers find certain rare volumes in Cairo's markets. I have connections. What is it you seek?" They paused, uncertain how much to reveal, but something about Mustafa's calm demeanor and that small leather-bound notebook in his hand gave them an odd confidence. Richard carefully spoke. "We're looking for a mythical book, possibly connected to an underground library, something people refer to as the perfect book." Mustafa's expression shifted subtly. "Ah, yes, I have heard rumors of such a legend. People come from far corners of the earth, chasing it. They rarely find satisfaction. May I ask, what drives you to search for it? Academic curiosity?" Barnabas exhaled slowly. "It's personal. Each of us loves a different aspect of books. And we were approached by a stranger in London who put this idea into our heads." Mustafa looked intrigued. "A stranger in London? Fascinating." Alice studied him warily. "Do you have any insight on where we might continue our search?" He sipped his coffee, pensive. "I know of many hidden corners in this city where old volumes are traded. There is a certain man, let's call him Yusuf, who deals in objects and books of uncertain provenance. He resides in the older quarters near the citadel. Yusuf is known to have knowledge of obscure manuscripts. He might have heard more about this perfect book legend." Richard brightened. "Could you arrange a meeting?" Mustafa tilted his head. "I could try. But be warned, Yusuf can be particular. He will only speak if he trusts you are serious, and there may be a fee for his information." Barnabas smiled. "We're prepared for that, within reason." Mustafa nodded, pulling out a small notepad. "Give me your contact. I will see what can be done." They exchanged numbers. Then Mustafa rose, bowing politely. "Until we meet again." He left them with a faint swirl of the cafe's smoky air. "Another clue," Mag said softly, both skeptical and hopeful. "Let's see if it pans out." They finished their coffee in tense contemplation, the swirl of the cafe's activity around them. True to his word, Mustafa called the next morning and said Yusuf would see them that evening in a shop near the citadel. The four arrived at the designated location, guided by a labyrinth of alleys. The citadel rose majestically in the distance, illuminated by floodlights. By the time they found the shop, a small antique store with a faded wooden door, they were questioning their sanity. But they knocked. A short, wiry man ushered them inside, pressing a finger to his lips in a gesture of silence. The front of the shop was cluttered with all manner of artifacts, from battered copper pots to tattered carpets. The faint smell of incense and old dust hung in the air. He led them behind a curtain into a back room where a single dim bulb lit a cramped space. There, a man sat on a low stool. He had a neatly trimmed beard and wore a white shirt with a simple vest. His eyes were sharp as a hawk's. He introduced himself as Yusuf. Mustafa stood beside him, arms folded. "You are the English seekers," Yusuf said, voice low. "You want to know about a certain perfect book." Alice's stomach fluttered with excitement. Yes, we have followed many clues, leading us here. Can you help? Yusuf took a moment, measuring each of them with his gaze. What do you think you will find if you get hold of such a volume? Mags, feeling the pressure, said, If it exists, it would be a moment of wonder, a unification of form, sound, scent, text, beyond imagination. We're curious, almost compelled. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her earnestness. Legends are tricky. Some say the perfect book is hidden in the desert. Others say it does not truly exist in the physical realm. It's an idea, an archetype of perfection. But I have heard of a man who once claimed to see such a volume in an ancient Sufi lodge in the heart of Cairo. He said the book was glimpsed for only a moment during a ritual, then vanished. Barnabas blinked. A Sufi lodge in Cairo? That's a far cry from an underground library. Indeed, Yusuf shrugged. Legends rarely align neatly. But the man insisted he saw an old Sufi master produce a tome so exquisite that the pages glimmered with an unearthly light, and that the air around them smelled of roses and musk. When he heard the pages turn, it was like distant music, and the text itself, the man said, contained infinite wisdom in every line. Then, as abruptly as it appeared, it was gone. Richard's heart pounded. This is extraordinary. Did the man say which lodge? Yusuf nodded slowly. He called it the House of the Hidden Word, Bait al-Kalima al-Makhfi. I do not know if it truly exists. Some say it is a spiritual place, not found on any map. Others claim it is disguised as an ordinary building in Old Cairo. The four exchanged glances. Another intangible thread, another shift in the story. They had traveled to the desert only to find partial ruins. Now they were pointed back to the city. Alice spoke. Do you know how we might find this house of the hidden word? Yusuf smiled cryptically. I know a Sufi teacher who might help, but you must understand, Sufi orders are insular. You cannot simply knock on the door. You need to be accepted, or at least recognized as sincere. Mustafa cleared his throat. Yusuf, I can vouch for these travelers. They are persistent. Perhaps that is enough sincerity. Yusuf drummed his fingers on the stool. It may be, but I will need a small payment for my introduction. Also, I advise you, the Sufis are mystical. They may speak in riddles or refuse you altogether. The four nodded in unison. Barnabas reached into his jacket, producing some Egyptian pounds. Yusuf accepted them with a subtle nod. He then wrote down an address on a slip of paper. Go here tomorrow at dusk. Ask for Sheikh Tariq. Tell him Yusuf sends you in good faith. If the house of the hidden word is real, Sheikh Tariq may guide you or may decide you are not worthy. That is all I can offer. They thanked him, hearts alive with fresh hope. As they left the shop, Mags whispered, This entire search is turning into a labyrinth of references, from desert ruins to hidden Sufi lodges. Are we being led astray or guided deeper? Alice squeezed her arm gently. Maybe both. But we can't stop now. We're too close. Or at least, we can't give up the chase. Together, they walked back through the winding streets of Cairo under a canopy of stars, the silhouettes of ancient mosques rising around them. The city teemed with unseen histories, any one of which might contain a door to the unimaginable. The next evening, guided by the slip of paper, they navigated through the labyrinth of Old Cairo. Narrow alleyways, archways, and centuries-old buildings surrounded them. Eventually, they reached a modest wooden door tucked between two faded stone structures, each centuries old. A small brass knocker glinted in the last light of day. With trepidation, Barnabas knocked. Footsteps echoed inside, and the door opened to reveal a young man with kind eyes, wearing a simple robe. They asked for Sheikh Tariq, repeating the phrase, Yusuf sends us in good faith. The young man nodded solemnly, beckoning them in. They found themselves in a courtyard illuminated by lanterns. A small fountain gurgled quietly. Several older men in white robes were gathered, murmuring verses that echoed hypnotically. The atmosphere was serene, as if time moved slower within those walls. Presently, a tall, serene figure approached. Sheikh Tarek, presumably. He had a gentle face framed by a short white beard. His voice was low, warm. "Welcome, my friends. You come seeking knowledge, Yusuf tells me." Richard took a step forward. "Yes, sheikhs. We have heard rumors that among the Sufi orders there may be knowledge of a hidden lodge, a place where a wondrous book was seen." The sheikh regarded them intently. "And what do you hope to gain from such a book?" They fell silent. Then Mag spoke with earnestness. "We hope to experience its beauty. We are four who love different aspects of books: binding, sound, scent, content. We heard tales that this might be the perfect embodiment of all." Sheikh Tarek's eyes flickered with something akin to amusement. "You are each drawn by a different sense. Fascinating. Many come to the path of knowledge, but rarely so distinct in their desires." Alice hesitated. "Is it real, or just a legend?" He took a slow breath. "In the Sufi way, what is real can also be a metaphor. The house of the hidden word is spoken of in hushed tones. Some say it is an inner place, an experience of the heart, rather than a physical location. Others insist it is an actual building where wise men guard a secret volume. Perhaps both are true." Barnabas's voice held a note of pleading. "Please, if you know how we might catch even a glimpse, we beg you." The sheikh gestured for them to sit on cushions near the fountain. He lowered himself gracefully, robed knees folding beneath him. The young man served mint tea in small glass cups. After a contemplative silence, Sheikh Tarek said, "To find the house of the hidden word, you must look where you do not expect to find it. That is its nature, hidden in plain sight. If you are permitted entry, you will understand. But it does not open for the unready." Mags frowned. "How can we become ready if we don't know how?" He offered a gentle smile. "Purify your intentions. Let go of your fear, your ego. Approach not as one who demands or claims, but as one who humbly seeks." Richard attempted to remain patient, though it all felt maddeningly vague. "Sheikh Tarek, we only have a little time in Cairo. Is there anything more concrete we can do?" The sheikh paused. "Tomorrow at midnight, there is a gathering of dervishes in an old mosque near the quarter called Darb al-Ahmar. It is not a show for tourists, but a genuine ceremony of remembrance. Dhikr. If your hearts are truly open, perhaps you will see beyond the veil. Some participants say they glimpse wonders." Alice, her heart fluttering, nodded. "We'll go. Thank you." He raised a hand in blessing. "Go in peace, and do not be surprised if the path leads inward. The perfect book, the hidden word. Perhaps they are intimately bound with your own hearts." Though the four felt no clearer direction, they thanked him sincerely. As they departed, the sheikh's final words resonated. "Sometimes the greatest of secrets hide where we least expect them. The problem is that nobody searches. Yes?" The phrase mirrored what the stranger in London had said. A chill ran through them. Once again, they were drawn deeper into a labyrinth of mysticism. Would they truly find a physical volume, or was the entire quest leading to something intangible, an inward revelation? That night, they slept fitfully, anticipating the coming midnight. Episode 5. Midnight in Darb al-Ahmar felt like stepping into another world. The narrow streets were draped in darkness, punctuated by the glow of street lamps and the hush of a city that never truly sleeps. They slipped through a small door into a centuries-old mosque. Inside, the architecture soared, softly lit by candles and discreet lanterns. A group of dervishes in flowing robes had gathered, chanting low prayers in a mesmerizing rhythm. Their voices echoed against the ancient walls, weaving a tapestry of devotion. The four English book lovers kept to a corner, observing respectfully. They each felt an odd stirring inside, as though the chanting resonated with something deeper than their ears. Slowly, the chanting built in intensity. The dervishes moved in a circular dance, pivoting gracefully, their garments spinning in arcs of white cloth. The swirl of motion and the deep, melodic repetition of the divine name seemed to warp time itself. Mags found tears slipping down her cheeks, though she couldn't say why. Barnabas closed his eyes, listening intently to the hush between the chants, that subtle moment of silence. Alice smelled the faint incense that rose in the air, a swirl of frankincense and myrrh. Richard tried to absorb the meaning of the chanting, though it was in Arabic. Then something strange happened. As the dervishes spun faster, each of the four felt a tug, as if a veil were lifting. The candlelight seemed to shimmer more brightly. The walls of the mosque seemed to recede, replaced by something indefinable, a sense of infinite space. They didn't move, yet they felt carried along by the dancer's momentum. In this heightened state, they became aware of a presence, like a door half open, and within that intangible doorway they sensed pages turning, a fragrance of old parchment, a hush of a perfect spine, the resonance of a language beyond mortal tongues. A voice, silent yet clear, seemed to whisper, "Do you truly seek the perfect book?" Alice's mind reeled. She nearly swayed on her feet. She thought she saw a fleeting image, a grand hall lined with shelves, an impossible architecture that spiraled upwards. In the center, a single volume glowing faintly, its binding of gold, its pages alive. She smelled the sweet musk of ancient libraries. She heard the hush of turning pages, a choir of wind. She glimpsed words dancing on the page that seemed to hold the sum of all knowledge and beauty. Then, as the chanting reached a crescendo, the vision fragmented. The dervishes slowed, the candle's light returned to normal. The swirl of motion diminished. They stood in ordinary space and time once more. Yet each of the four wore expressions of stunned awe. They exchanged glances. Mags's tears glistened. Barnabas clenched and unclenched his fists, as if searching for a tactile anchor. Alice felt goosebumps on her arms. Richard's lips parted in silent wonder. "That was," Mags whispered. "Did you see it?" Barnabas nodded slowly. "Like a dream. A library. A perfect volume." Richard pressed a hand to his chest, heart pounding. But it felt real. More real than reality. As if something parted for a moment. Alice fought to find her voice. "So the perfect book, might it be more than just a physical object? Could it be an experience, a revelation?" Before they could discuss further, one of the dervishes approached them, face serene. He spoke softly. "You have glimpsed what your heart seeks, perhaps. But remember, illusions can trick us. The true secret cannot be taken by force, only received in readiness." Mags asked breathlessly, "So is it here, in Cairo?" He offered a kind smile. "The house of the hidden word is neither here nor there. It can appear where it wills. Seek humbly, and perhaps the door will open again. Or perhaps it has already opened. Only you can say." With that, he bowed and returned to the circle, leaving them standing in the dim glow. They lingered for a while, uncertain whether to remain or depart. Eventually, they slipped out into the night, the swirl of chanting echoing behind them. Walking back through the winding streets, they felt disoriented, as though the city had shifted. The world seemed brimming with unseen possibilities. Yet despite that glimpse, they had no tangible book in hand, no certain clue, only the memory of something extraordinary. In the guesthouse courtyard, they discussed it quietly under the stars. "So," Barnabas said in a hushed tone, "maybe the perfect book is a spiritual concept. If that's the case, we've been searching for something that can't be pinned down physically." Richard drummed his fingers on the table. Yet that stranger in London had a physical tome, bound so exquisitely, smelled so ancient, sounded so perfect when he closed it. That was real. No hallucination. Mags added, "And we found references to actual volumes, like the Book of Enos, the Golden Binder, the Book Perfecta. So maybe there is a tangible version, but it's entangled with something metaphysical." Alice sipped water, her throat still dry. If the perfect book unites the physical and the spiritual, that might explain why it's so elusive. They fell silent, each lost in thought. Then Mag said, "Are we near the end of our quest, or only at the beginning?" Nobody answered. The call to prayer rose in the distance, echoing across the city rooftops. They spent the next few days circling around in Cairo, hoping for further leads, but none appeared. Mustafa said Yusuf had no more information. Sheikh Tarek was kind, but mostly silent, telling them only that the path may continue where you least expect. Eventually, the four concluded that perhaps it was time to return to England. They had gleaned all they could from the desert and from Cairo's hidden corners. Though disappointed, they also felt a subtle transformation inside. Something had shifted in them during that mystical experience with the dervishes. They couldn't articulate it fully, but it lingered like an afterimage. They booked their flights home, arranged their departure. On the day before they left, Dr. Galal welcomed them back for a final visit. He was saddened they hadn't found the rumored library intact, but he listened with quiet awe to their account of the Sufi ceremony. "Perhaps," he said with a wise smile, "the journey was what you truly needed. Some quests don't end where we expect, but that doesn't mean they fail." The next morning, they bid Cairo farewell and boarded a plane to London. Looking out the window as the plane ascended, Mag saw the vast desert recede below them. She closed her eyes, inhaling the recycled airplane air, longing for the next stage of the adventure, whatever that might be. Back at Heathrow, they navigated baggage claim, passed customs, and emerged into a grey English drizzle. Huddling under umbrellas, they piled into a taxi, exhausted by jet lag, but eager to see Cecil Court again. When they finally arrived at Blackwood and Braithwaite, night had already fallen. The warm glow of lamplight shone through the shop window. Trevor, their caretaker, was waiting inside, a cup of tea in his hands. He jumped up to greet them, eyes aglitter. "Welcome back," he exclaimed. "You look exhausted. Come in, I've got a fresh pot on the brew." They dragged their suitcases in. The comforting smell of old books enveloped them. They sank into chairs around the small table, letting the familiarity soothe them. Trevor busied himself pouring cups of tea. "So, how was your search?" he asked, hardly containing his curiosity. They exchanged wry smiles, uncertain where to begin. Barnabas gave a brief outline. The desert ruins, the ephemeral leads, the mystical ceremony. Trevor listened, entranced. "Goodness," he whispered. "It sounds like a grand tale, even if you didn't find a final answer. Are you going to keep looking?" "We're not sure," Mag said. "We might need time to think, to process everything." Trevor nodded. Then he paused, face brightening, as if he just remembered something. "Oh, a note arrived for you some days ago. Rather strange. The messenger was an odd fellow. He wouldn't give his name. He said it was important. I put it in the desk drawer." Alice arched a brow. The memory of the cryptic stranger who started this all flickered in her mind. Could it be him again? Trevor shrugged, hurried to the desk, and returned with a small envelope of stiff parchment. Alice took it, noticing it was sealed with plain wax, no insignia. Carefully, she broke the seal and unfolded a single sheet. The handwriting was refined, almost calligraphic. It read, "I hear you have been searching. Take heart, for the horizon is not always in the distance. Sometimes it is closer than you imagine. A friend." Just that. No signature, no clue. They passed the note around in silence. Finally, Richard chuckled bitterly. "Another riddle. Sometimes the horizon is closer than you imagine. Are they implying the perfect book is here in London, or even in this shop?" Alice pursed her lips. "That can't be. We've rummaged every corner. We'd know if we had such a thing." Barnabas said thoughtfully, "Or maybe it's a hint that the search is not about distance, but about perspective. We might be overcomplicating everything." Trevor, perplexed, said, "So does it mean you'll keep looking?" The four were too tired to decide. They parted ways with Trevor for the night, trudging upstairs to their small living quarters above the shop. Sleep came swiftly. Episode 6. In the following days, life at Blackwood and Braithwaite resumed a semblance of normalcy, though none of them truly felt the same. They shared stories of their travels with regular customers, half laughing at how far they'd gone for a rumour. Yet a quiet tension loomed. Every so often they recalled the note, "Take heart, for the horizon is not always in the distance." A riddle, but a riddle that kept them on edge. They'd visited the desert. They'd glimpsed a mystical vision. They'd rummaged ancient tomes. And all that time, the solution might be, here? They tried to carry on, but the question nagged at them. One evening, as the shop closed, they gathered around the same battered oak table where, weeks ago, they had resolved to chase the legend. A drizzle streaked the windows. A single lamp cast warm light. "We never fully searched our own trove," Richard said suddenly. "We have crates in the storeroom we haven't opened in years, boxes from old estate sales. Maybe the note's hinting we should look in our own collection." Barnabas rubbed his chin. "Remember that half-forgotten corner under the staircase, full of neglected volumes we never catalogued properly?" Alice blinked. "Yes, we always said we'd get around to it, but it's decades' worth of dusty acquisitions." Mags raised her brows. "Shall we rummage?" A group nod. They ventured into the back storeroom, a cramped space with shelves bowing under the weight of boxes. A single overhead bulb glowed feebly. They rummaged through the dusty crates, half sneezing as old paper motes filled the air. They opened box after box. Old dictionaries, battered poetry anthologies, a random dictionary of mathematics from 1892, the diaries of a minor Victorian official. None seemed remarkable. They kept going, occasionally pausing to read a note scrawled in a margin or an ex libris marking. Hours passed. The dust got into their throats. Then, in the far corner under the staircase, behind several stacked crates, they found a small trunk. It was battered, the leather straps cracked with age. It bore a label that read, "Estate of G. Farnsworth, purchased 1995. Richard frowned. Farnsworth. The name rings a bell. A minor collector we bought out decades ago, I think. We must have tossed this trunk here and forgotten it. They lugged it out, carefully pried open the rusted latch. Inside were 6 volumes wrapped in cloth. Alice gingerly lifted one. The moment she touched it, her heart skipped a beat. The cloth felt unusually fine, and beneath it she could sense the firm edges of a leather-bound book. She unwrapped it. In the dim glow they beheld a volume that made Alice suck in her breath. The binding was a sumptuous red Morocco leather, with gold tooling in swirling patterns reminiscent of the filigree on the stranger's tome. Barnabas, trembling, touched the spine. It gave a faint, perfect creak. Mags lifted it to her nose, inhaling. Her eyes widened. Somehow it carried a scent both fresh and ancient, vanilla and spice, paper and leather. Richard leaned in to read the spine. It bore no title, just an ornate symbol, a circle with 4 interwoven lines. Alice breathed. "This can't be, can it?" Barnabas, voice shaking, said, "Let's open it." They carefully parted the covers. The hinges moved in a flawless motion, yielding a gentle hush of air. Barnabas nearly swooned. Inside, the pages were thick, almost velvety, each illuminated with lines of text that seemed to shift between archaic languages, Latin, Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, and others they couldn't immediately place. The words danced in intricate patterns, weaving quotations from known authors, Shakespeare, Milton, Chaucer, Newton, Plato, and snatches of lesser-known manuscripts. Mags inhaled again. "That smell, it's extraordinary, like the desert wind fused with library dust and a hint of blossoming flowers." Richard flipped through the pages, scanning bits of text. These paragraphs, they combined philosophy, poetry, mathematics, science. There's a passage here that quotes Socrates, then leaps to Einstein, then merges into a personal reflection that references quantum theory. It's like it's containing everything. He was trembling. I've never read anything like it. Alice stared in awe at the gold tooling. The binding is unbelievably fine, like the handiwork of a master craftsman lost to time. Barnabas opened and closed it again, tears in his eyes at the perfection of the sound. It was as though the covers whispered, "This is what you have longed for." They looked up at each other, hearts pounding. "Is this the book?" Mags murmured, almost afraid to say it. "Have we had it in our shop all along?" Richard stumbled for words. How is that possible? Did Farnsworth never mention it? Or did he not realize what he had? Alice recalled the strange man's clue. Such a book does indeed exist, but precisely where and when you least expect it. The problem is that nobody searches. She nearly laughed in wonder. They had scoured half the world only to find it here, in a forgotten trunk under their own staircase. "What do we do with it?" Barnabas asked in a hushed tone. "If this truly is the perfect book, do we keep it hidden, share it with the world?" Mags gazed at the luminous pages. "How can we keep something like this locked away? But who would even believe us if we claimed it?" Richard nodded slowly. And would it lose its magic if paraded in public? Or spark chaos? People have gone mad seeking it. We must be careful. This is bigger than us. A profound stillness settled over them. The weight of the book in Alice's hands felt like a sleeping dragon, immense power in a delicate form. It resonated with each of them. Perfect binding, perfect scent, perfect sound, perfect content. Everything they had yearned for was here, resting in their shop. And, ironically, the search had been unnecessary, or entirely necessary, because only through their journey had they become ready to recognize it, to appreciate it. Finally, Barnabas spoke, voice trembling. "We keep it safe. We study it quietly, perhaps. In time, we may reveal it carefully to those who truly seek, but let's not turn it into a spectacle." The others agreed. Gently, they closed the book, wrapping it again in its cloth. They carried it upstairs to a private alcove, carefully placing it in a locked cabinet. For hours, they simply sat nearby, hardly believing what had happened. Later, in the silent hush of the store, they reflected on the mad adventure from London to Cairo and back. They had chased illusions in the desert, glimpsed mystical rites, rummaged half the Bodleian library, and all along their fabled treasure lay dusty and undiscovered, mere steps from where they drank tea and welcomed customers each day. A hush deeper than any they had known embraced them, one of reverence, gratitude, and a trembling sense of destiny. The desert, the old archives, the Sufi ceremony. It had all been part of the path that led them to open their eyes to what was right beneath their noses. Perhaps that was the final riddle, that the perfect can be hidden in plain sight, awaiting only those who truly search. No one could say how the stranger had known or why he had chosen them. Perhaps he was a trickster or a guardian of secrets. Perhaps he himself had once glimpsed the volume. But in the end, the final answer to the legend lay in a locked cabinet of blackwood and Braithwaite, resting quietly. And so their story, at least for now, closed with that wondrous surprise. The perfect book was theirs at last. Yet they would discover, in the weeks and months to come, that holding it was only the beginning of understanding its infinite marvel. For the pages were inexhaustible, the words always shifting, revealing new layers of meaning. Day by day, they discovered that the real magic was not in the possession, but in the shared awe and humility it inspired. Thus ended, and yet forever continued, the strangest tale of four eccentric booksellers on Cecil Court who sought the perfect volume across deserts and dreams, only to find it where they least expected it, under their own staircase, gathering dust, waiting patiently for the moment they were ready to see.